chooses your town for the nuclear waste site, would you vote to approve? Despite the risk, 51% said yes, they would approve. Then, the economist surveyors asked them a second question. They improved the offer. They said, suppose Parliament chooses your town for the nuclear waste site and offers to pay each resident of the town a yearly amount of money in compensation for the risk, up to $8,000 a year per person. Then would you be willing to accept? Now what percentage do you think said yes? What would you guess? Just call it out. 80%? What do you think? 80%? 90? 100? 30? This is like an auction. The number fell from 51 to 25%. Now, so those who said 30 were on the right track. From the standpoint of standard economic reasoning, this is a paradox. Because according to the law of supply and demand, when you offer to pay people to do something, typically more people are willing to do that thing, not fewer. So what do you think explains the fact that the number willing to accept the nuclear waste site in their community fell in half when they were offered money? Who has an explanation? Yes?
我觉得如果公平的把钱和道德都作为一个可以对等面对的单位的话，那只能说付出来的钱让他们不足以觉得足够买他们的道德感。如果今天把金额提高到一定高，甚至高到比他们的年收入甚至10年收入都更高的时候，说不定他们认为他们的道德就可以被买走了。如果说今天提出来的金额大到他们可能100年都赚不来，但他们仍然不愿意去卖他们的这种权利的话，我只能说瑞士这个国家真的非常成功，因为他们的道德感始终不能被金钱替代。这就是我的感觉，谢谢。
So you like that? All right, that's good. That's good. Any other explanations? Yes.
如果我是当地居民的话，你今天付我钱，那我会觉得有鬼。
I see.
对，就是一定是很危险，你才觉得你要 just compensate 这件事情。
All right, that's good. That's good. So we have thank you for that. So we have two possible explanations. The one we just heard says, when I'm not being paid, I say, okay, I'm willing to accept it. Then someone offers me a lot of money, and I think to myself, this must really be riskier than I thought. They're willing to pay me money for it. But they tested that hypothesis, and it turns out that the estimate of the risk before and after the financial offer, the estimate of the risk was about the same among the respondents. So although that is a plausible answer, it turns out the evaluation of the risk was about the same, which suggests the earlier hypothesis. It seems that when they were asked to accept without payment, 51% said yes out of a sense of civic duty, civic responsibility. They were willing to make a sacrifice for the sake of the common good. They figured the community as a whole needs the energy. The waste has to go somewhere. If this is the safest place, even though it poses a risk to us, we're willing to do it for the sake of the common good. But then when they were offered money, though standard economic reasoning would suggest that the money should simply add to the incentive, the monetary incentive actually drove out the sense of civic responsibility because it changed the meaning of the question. What first seemed to be a matter of civic duty, civic virtue, now became a financial transaction. People were unwilling to be bought out. In fact, they asked people who changed their minds, "Why did you change your mind?" And they said, "We didn't want to be bribed." Back to the idea of a bribe. Why was it a bribe? They were willing to make a sacrifice for the sake of the common good, but they were not willing to sell out the safety of themselves and their families simply for a monetary payment. So here's another example where a cash incentive that would seem to increase the willingness to perform a certain act has the opposite effect. And the way it has an opposite effect is by driving out, in this case, the sense of the common good, a sense of shared responsibility. One further example. In Israel every year, high school students take time to gather funds, collect funds for charitable causes. Donation Day, they call it. One year they did an experiment. They divided the students into 3 groups. The first group, they gave a short speech about the importance of the charitable causes and sent them off to collect the funds. The second group received the same speech, but was also offered a 1% commission on the funds they collected. The third group was given the motivational speech and offered a 10% commission on all the funds they raised that day. Which of the 3 groups do you think raised the most money? What do you think? The third, 10% commission is pretty good. Some people say the first. Actually, it was the first. The group that was not paid anything raised more than the other 2 groups. Now, it is true that the group offered 10% raised more than the group offered 1%. So the cash incentive, the market mechanism, did operate. But the group that was not paid any commission raised more even than those who were paid 10%. Now, here again, this is a paradox from the standpoint of standard economic reasoning. Who has an explanation? What was going on? How do you explain this? Anyone? Over toward the side. Stand up. Yes, go ahead.
如果他没有拿钱的话，就是去募款没有拿钱的话，他会觉得自己有义务做到最好。然后如果他领了钱的话，他可能可以怠惰，因为一部分的钱是他的，所以他怠惰的时候，对于那个活动本身的本分就没有那么多。对，谢谢。
So the obligation somehow, the sense of obligation for the cause is somehow diminished when money enters the picture. In this way, I do think this is what was happening. Here again, as with the Swiss vote, it seems that where the higher motivation of serving the public good is present, to introduce money runs the risk of driving it out. Well, I want to put to you one other kind of question about the role of markets, a question that has to do with the role of market power. Part of the appeal of market reasoning is that it seems an alternative way of allocating goods, an alternative way to the way of power. We sometimes think that when government decides, that's the exercise of power. When markets decide, that's just individuals choosing to exchange money for goods, money for services. I want to ask Imagine that you live in a society with a lot of small shopkeepers, small shops, zahodyen. And then, gradually over time, 7-Eleven comes along and creates more and more stores, and pretty soon there are a great many 7-Elevens and fewer zahodyen. How many think that this change is a good thing? And how many find this change troubling or objectionable? Raise your white program if you think it's a good thing, and your orange program if you think it's objectionable, troubling. Here it looks like, well, another pretty even division, though this time I think I see a few more white than orange, but it's a pretty even division. Why? Who can tell us? Someone who's bothered by it. No, let's start with the white. Someone who thinks it's a good development. What would be your reason? Yes, in the front row.
Hello, my name is Anne. I'm a USC alumni. I'm very grateful I can be here. So to answer your question, I think most of us have seen the movie, You've Got the Mail. There was a very old small bookshop, and then, it got disappeared because there is a chain store around the corner by Tom Hanks, right? So I think
what's the name? I'm sorry, what's the name of the movie?
You've Got the Mail.
What is it?
By Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks.
Okay. And so a small bookstore is driven out of business by a big chain bookstore.
Yeah.
Yes, and?
So I think it's pretty similar to your question. The
It is
local
similar.
杂货店 and the 7-Eleven, right?
Yes.
I think when we talk about this question, we have to think one question first. What kind of market we are talking about actually? I would like to go back a few questions previously, like your medical needs compared to all other examples you gave us previously. I think they are different actually, because for medical needs, for all the hospitals, their goals are not supposed to be making money. However, if we are talking about the business, when it comes to business, for example, if I'm running the Coca-Cola company, of course, all I do is all about making money, make a fortune. So when it comes to business, it's market-driven, I think. But when it comes to like medical needs or medical suppliers, I think it's another story.
Okay, that's good. Stay there. So you are not troubled when the zahodyen are driven out by the 7-Eleven, or when the small bookstore is driven out by the chain bookstore, or by Amazon, or its equivalents.
Yeah.
That's progress. That's stores coming and offering more of what customers want at a lower price, perhaps.
Yeah.
That's economic efficiency.
Yes.
And that's different from the medical cases.
Yes, different.
And the reason it's different is that the purpose of a shop or a bookstore, these are commercial enterprises.
Yes.
Hospitals don't exist for the sake of making money or profits,
No.
Whereas stores, shops do. That's what business is, to make money.
Exactly.
And so that's the basis of the distinction. It's very good, and it helps connect this with our earlier cases. What's your name again?
Anne.
Anne. Okay, stay there, Anne. I want to hear from someone who disagrees with Anne and who does find it troubling if the zahodyen is driven out by the 7-Eleven or if the small bookstore is driven out by the chain store. I want to hear from someone who disagrees with Anne and who does find it troubling if the zahodyen is driven out by the 7-Eleven or if the small bookstore is driven out by the chain store. Yes. Go ahead, with the glasses. Yes, go ahead.